The alarm bells screamed across the command bridge of the Zephyrian flagship as Commander Veltar watched his homeworld die. Through the massive viewing screen, Zephyr Prime looked like a wounded animal bleeding light into space. The once beautiful blue and green planet now showed angry red scars where the Void Swarm had begun its feast. Veltar pressed his six-fingered hand against the cold metal railing and felt his heart's beating in the strange rhythm of fear. The Zephyrians had ruled this sector of space for over 3,000 years. Their technology could bend light itself, create matter from pure energy, and build ships that moved faster than most species could think. Yet none of it mattered now. The Void Swarm moved like a living shadow against the stars. Each unit was no bigger than a human fist, but there were billions of them. They ate everything they touched and turned it into more of themselves. Metal, rock, flesh, energy. Nothing could stop their hunger. The swarm had already consumed 17 star systems, leaving behind empty space where entire civilizations once thrived. Lieutenant Keshara, Veltar's communications officer, turned from her station with defeat written across her scaled features. "Sir, the quantum shields are down to 12%. The swarm has breached the outer moon defenses." Veltar nodded grimly. They had tried everything. The Galactic Council's best military minds had studied the swarm for months. The crystalline hegemony sent their most powerful energy weapons. The Machine Collective offered their adaptive combat algorithms. The Ancient Ones even shared weapons from their legendary vaults. Nothing worked. The swarm learned from every attack. It adapted to every defense. Each victory against it only made it stronger and smarter. The nanobotic entities that made up the swarm could analyze any weapon used against them and develop immunity within hours. They were not just consuming matter, they were consuming knowledge itself. "Send another distress call," Veltar ordered, though he knew it was hopeless. Every major civilization had already declared the situation beyond help. The evacuation ships could only save a tiny fraction of Zephyr Prime's population. Billions would die. Keshara's fingers danced over her control panel, sending the message across all known frequencies. The standard galactic emergency protocol transmitted their location, the nature of the threat, and a desperate plea for any assistance. She had sent the same message every hour for the past 3 days. The responses were always the same: expressions of sympathy followed by explanations of why help was impossible. Hours passed like years. The swarm continued its relentless advance, converting the outer cities into more units of itself. Veltar watched entire continents disappear as the mechanical plague spread across his world's surface. The evacuation ships reported they were at capacity, but less than 1% of the population had been saved. Then something impossible happened. Keshara's communication board lit up with an incoming transmission. The signal was crude by galactic standards, using old-fashioned radio waves instead of quantum entanglement. The source identifier showed it came from a small blue planet in the outer rim territories, barely 50 light-years away. "This is Captain Jake Morrison of the human vessel Terra's Hope," the voice said in the common galactic language, though with a strange accent that made some words sound almost musical. "We received your distress call. Relax. We've got this." Veltar stared at the communication panel in disbelief. Humans were one of the youngest species in the galaxy. They had barely achieved faster-than-light travel a century ago. Their ships used primitive fusion engines and kinetic weapons that most civilizations had abandoned thousands of years earlier. They had no quantum technology, no energy manipulation capabilities, and no experience with threats like the Void Swarm. "Repeat your message, human vessel," Keshara said, her voice carefully controlled despite her confusion. "I said relax. We've got this," Captain Morrison replied with casual confidence that seemed almost insulting given the circumstances. "We're about 12 hours out from your position. Try to hold on until we get there." Lieutenant Keshara looked at her commander with wide eyes. The translation matrix must be malfunctioning. No species would offer help against the void swarm with such casual confidence, especially not the humans who barely qualified as a spacefaring civilization. "Human captain," Veltar said, taking control of the communication himself. "You may not understand the nature of this threat. The void swarm has destroyed 17 star systems. The combined military might of the Galactic Council has proven ineffective. Your assistance, while appreciated, would only result in the loss of your ships and crew." There was a pause, then the sound of something the humans called laughter. "Commander, I appreciate the warning, but we've been tracking this swarm for weeks. We know exactly what we're dealing with. Trust me, we've seen worse." Veltar wondered what could possibly be worse than the extinction of all life in a star system, but he didn't have time to ask. The swarm had begun consuming the planet's core, and the gravitational fluctuations were wreaking havoc on his fleet's positioning systems. The next few hours passed in a blur of desperate defensive actions. The Zephyrian ships fired their remaining energy reserves at the swarm's leading edge, managing to slow its advance but not stop it. Every minute brought the mechanical plague closer to completing its consumption of Zephyr Prime. When the human ships finally arrived, Veltar almost couldn't believe what he saw. 12 vessels that looked like metal boxes with engines attached approached the swarm without hesitation. They were tiny compared to the Zephyrian flagship, and their design was so simple it seemed primitive. No flowing curves or elegant lines, just basic geometric shapes welded together with obvious joints and seams. Captain Morrison's voice crackled over the communication system again. "All right, Commander Veltar, we're going to need you to pull. Your ship's back about 50,000 kilometers. We're about to make some noise." Veltar wanted to protest that retreat would doom the remaining evacuation ships, but something in the human captain's tone stopped him. There was no fear there, no uncertainty, just the calm confidence of someone who knew exactly what they were doing. As the Zephyrian fleet pulled back, Veltar watched the human ships form a loose formation around the advancing swarm. They looked like insects confronting a storm, but they moved with purpose and precision that suggested careful planning rather than desperate heroism. Whatever the humans had planned, Veltar realized, the galaxy was about to witness something unprecedented. Captain Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of Terra's Hope and studied the tactical display showing the void swarm's movements. The mechanical plague spread across Zephyr Prime like spilled ink, consuming everything in its path with terrifying efficiency. Most commanders would see an impossible enemy, but Jake saw a puzzle waiting to be solved. "Lisa, what's our status on the quantum jammers?" he asked his chief engineer, Lisa Park, who was hunched over a jury-rigged control panel that looked like it had been built from spare parts. Lisa looked up from her work, pushing a strand of black hair from her eyes. "All 12 units are ready for deployment. The modification you suggested should work, but we won't know for sure until we test it on the real thing." Jake nodded and turned to his tactical officer, Danny Rodriguez, who was tracking the swarm's movement patterns on his screen. "Danny, are you seeing what I'm seeing in their formation?" Danny squinted at the data streaming across his display. "Yeah, Captain. They're not moving randomly at all. Look at sectors 7 through 12. They're maintaining perfect coordination, even while consuming different types of matter. Something is keeping them synchronized." Amy Watson, the ship's science officer, looked up from her analysis station with excitement in her voice. "Captain, I've been studying the quantum signatures from the swarm units. They're using entangled particles for instant communication across the entire formation. It's actually quite elegant." Jake smiled. While the rest of the galaxy had focused on the swarm's destructive capabilities, his crew had spent weeks studying how it worked. The answer was surprisingly simple once you knew where to look. The void swarm wasn't just a collection of individual units. It was a single organism with billions of limbs, all controlled by a central network. "That's their weakness," Jake said, pointing at the tactical display. "They're too organized. Cut the communication between units and they'll be as lost as a person trying to walk with their eyes closed. The Zephyrian commander's voice crackled. Over the communication system, tension clear in every word. Human captain, the swarm has increased its consumption rate. At current speed, it will finish consuming our planet's core within 6 hours. Don't worry, Commander, Jake replied calmly. We just need to introduce a little chaos into their system. Engineer Park activated her modified control panel, and screens across the bridge lit up with technical data that would have confused most galactic civilizations. The humans had taken their basic quantum interference technology, originally designed for jamming enemy communications, and modified it to target the specific frequencies the swarm used for coordination. Think of it like this, Amy explained, to the confused Zephyrian officers over the open channel. Imagine you're trying to conduct an orchestra, but someone starts playing loud music in the concert hall. The musicians can't hear your directions anymore, so the whole performance falls apart. The human ships moved into position with practiced precision. Each vessel carried 4 quantum jamming devices, crude by galactic standards but perfectly suited for their intended purpose. The technology was based on principles humans had developed for disrupting electronic systems on Earth centuries ago, scaled up and modified for use against quantum networks. Pilot Tony Chen led a squadron of small fighters toward the swarm's leading edge. His ship was barely larger than a shuttle, armed with nothing more than basic kinetic weapons and one of Lisa's quantum jammers. To any observer, it looked like a suicide mission. Remember, people, Jake's voice came through the squadron's communication system. We're not here to fight them. We're here to confuse them. Tony's fighter darted between massive swarm formations that could have destroyed his ship with a single touch. The nanobotic entities reached for him with mechanical limbs, but their movements were perfectly predictable. They operated on pure logic, following programmed responses that made them efficient but inflexible. Deploying Jammer 1, Tony reported, as he released the first device into the heart of a large swarm cluster. The device was nothing more than a modified radio transmitter wrapped in basic shielding, but it broadcast quantum static on exactly the right frequency. The effect was immediate and spectacular. The swarm units that had been moving in perfect formation suddenly began bumping into each other. Some stopped moving entirely, while others spun in confused circles. A few began attacking nearby units, unable to distinguish between friend and enemy without their communication network. "It's working!" Amy shouted from her station as she monitored the chaos spreading through the swarm. "The quantum interference is breaking their coordination protocols. They're trying to re-establish communication, but our jammers are adapting faster than they can compensate." Jake watched with satisfaction as more human fighters deployed their jammers throughout the swarm formation. Each device created a bubble of confusion that grew larger as affected units spread their disorder to nearby clusters. It was like watching a perfectly organized army suddenly forget how to march. But the humans weren't finished. Medical officer Kate Sullivan had been studying samples of the nanobotic entities that the Zephyrians had managed to capture during earlier battles. What she found surprised everyone. "Captain," Kate said, looking up from her microscope with amazement, "these things are incredibly sophisticated, but they have one major flaw. They're vulnerable to electromagnetic pulses on a very specific frequency, the same frequency we use in our medical scanners." Jake raised an eyebrow. "You mean the machines that doctors use to take pictures inside people's bodies?" "Exactly," Kate confirmed. "The nanobots use that frequency for internal communication between their components. Hit them with the right pulse, and they shut down their replication systems to prevent damage. It's like putting them to sleep. Within minutes, every human ship was broadcasting modified medical scanner pulses toward the swarm. The technology was so basic that most galactic civilizations would have dismissed it as primitive, but it was having an extraordinary effect on the mechanical plague. Swarm units began falling out of formation, their replication processes grinding to a halt. Without the ability to create new units, the plague's advance slowed dramatically. Combined with the quantum jammers disrupting their coordination, the once terrifying Void Swarm was rapidly becoming a collection of confused and inactive machines. "This is incredible," Commander Veltar's voice came through the communication system, filled with wonder. "The swarm is actually retreating from your ships. How is this possible?" Jake leaned back in his captain's chair with a satisfied grin. "Sometimes the simplest solutions are the best ones, Commander. While everyone else was trying to build bigger weapons, we just figured out how to turn off their power switch." The battle, if it could even be called that, continued for several more hours. The human ships methodically deployed their jammers and pulse generators throughout the swarm formation, creating expanding zones of chaos and inactivity. The mechanical plague that had terrorized the galaxy for months was being defeated by technology that humans had developed for completely different purposes. As the last of the active swarm units went dormant, Jake opened a channel to the Zephyrian fleet. "Commander Veltar, you can start sending your ships back to collect the inactive nanobots. They should be safe to handle now, and your scientists might find them useful for research." The silence that followed lasted so long that Jake wondered if the communication system had failed. When Commander Veltar finally spoke, his voice was filled with disbelief and gratitude. "Captain Morrison, what you have accomplished here today will be remembered throughout galactic history. How can we ever repay this debt?" Jake looked around at his crew, who were already preparing for their next mission. "No debt necessary, Commander. We're just glad we could help." The human approach to warfare confused every military expert in the galaxy. As the Void Swarm continued to fall apart under the influence of quantum jammers and medical scanner pulses, Commander Veltar found himself questioning everything he thought he knew about combat tactics. Pilot Tony Chen guided his small fighter through clouds of dormant nanobots, dropping what the humans cheerfully called confusion bombs with surgical precision. Each device was barely larger than a briefcase, built from components that any first-year engineering student could assemble. Yet they were systematically dismantling an enemy that had defeated the galaxy's most advanced military forces. "Lisa, how are our pulse generators holding up?" Captain Morrison asked his chief engineer as she monitored the modified medical equipment from her jury-rigged control station. Lisa Park wiped sweat from her forehead and grinned. "Better than expected, actually. The nanobots are so focused on protecting themselves from the electromagnetic pulses that they're completely ignoring everything else. It's like they're hiding under a blanket and hoping we'll go away." On the main viewing screen, the Void Swarm's once terrifying formation had dissolved into chaos. Units that had moved with perfect coordination now drifted aimlessly through space. Some had begun attacking each other, unable to distinguish between allies and enemies without their communication network. Others had simply shut down completely, floating like metallic debris against the stars. Science officer Amy Watson monitored the swarm's quantum signatures from her station, amazement clear in her voice. "Captain, the quantum interference is spreading faster than we anticipated. Each affected unit is broadcasting confused signals to its neighbors, creating a cascade effect throughout the entire formation." Jake nodded with satisfaction. "It's like a computer virus, but for mechanical organisms. The more connected they are, the faster the confusion spreads." Medical Officer Kate Sullivan looked up from her analysis of the nanobotic samples. "Sir, I'm detecting something interesting. The nanobots aren't just shutting down their replication systems. They're actually trying to repair what they think is damage caused by our medical scanner frequencies. They're consuming their own resources to fix problems that don't exist." "So, they're eating themselves?" Danny Rodriguez asked from his tactical station. "In a sense, yes," Kate confirmed. "They're so programmed to maintain perfect function that they can't distinguish between actual damage and the interference we're creating. They're literally debugging themselves to death." The irony wasn't lost on anyone. The galaxy's most feared enemy was being defeated by what humans considered basic troubleshooting techniques. The same principles they used to fix broken computers and medical equipment were causing the Void Swarm to self-destruct. Commander Veltar's voice crackled over the communication system, filled with wonder and confusion. Captain Morrison, our sensors show that some swarm units are actually dismantling themselves. Is this part of your strategy? Not exactly, Jake replied with a chuckle. But we'll take it. The nanobots are designed to be perfect, which means they can't handle imperfection. We're not destroying them. We're just making them think they're broken so they try to fix themselves. Pilot Tony Chen's voice came through the squadron communication channel as he completed another bombing run. Captain, I'm seeing something weird in Sector 12. A whole cluster of swarm units just formed up into a perfect sphere and stopped moving entirely. Amy Watson checked her readings and laughed. They're trying to create a clean quantum environment inside the sphere to escape our interference. It's actually quite clever, but it won't work. Our jammers are designed to penetrate any shielding they can generate. Jake watched as more swarm clusters attempted the same defensive maneuver, pulling their units into tight formations that isolated them from the quantum chaos surrounding them. It was a reasonable response, but it played right into the humans. Hands! All fighters! Target the spherical formations! Jake ordered. Deploy jammers right in the center of each sphere. The human pilots moved with practiced efficiency, their small ships darting between the massive swarm formations like insects, avoiding a giant's swatting hand. The nanobotic entities reached for them with mechanical precision, but their responses were predictable and easily avoided. Within minutes, confusion bombs were detonating inside each defensive sphere. The enclosed spaces amplified the quantum interference, creating feedback loops that completely overwhelmed the nanobots' communication systems. The perfect spheres dissolved into clouds of inactive units. Engineer Lisa Park monitored the power consumption of their modified medical equipment and shook her head in amazement. Captain, we're running this entire operation on less power than it takes to heat coffee in the ship's galley. Meanwhile, the swarm is burning through massive amounts of energy trying to counteract our interference. Efficient warfare, Jake mused. Let the enemy defeat themselves while you conserve your resources. The tactical display showed the Void Swarm's formation continuing to collapse. What had once been a coordinated assault force was now scattered debris drifting through space. The mechanical plague that had consumed 17 star systems was being stopped by 12 human ships using technology that most galactic civilizations considered obsolete. Medical Officer Kate Sullivan made another discovery as she analyzed the inactive nanobots. Sir, I think I know why our medical scanner frequencies are so effective against them. The nanobots use biomimetic processes for self-repair, and our medical scanners are designed to interact with biological tissue. We're essentially giving them a medical examination they can't handle. Like taking an X-ray of a machine that thinks it's alive, Danny Rodriguez suggested. Exactly, Kate confirmed. The nanobots are trying to respond to our scans as if they were biological organisms, but their mechanical nature can't process the information correctly. It's causing system-wide failures throughout their network. Jake looked around at his crew with pride. While the galaxy's greatest military minds had tried to outmuscle and out-technology the Void Swarm, his people had simply approached it as a technical problem to be solved. They hadn't needed ancient weapons or advanced energy. Systems. Just basic understanding of how things worked and the willingness to try unconventional solutions. Captain, Tony Chen's voice came through the communication system. I'm seeing massive power fluctuations throughout the remaining swarm units. It looks like they're preparing for some kind of coordinated response. Amy Watson checked her quantum readings and frowned. The swarm is trying to adapt to our interference by changing its communication frequency. If it succeeds, our jammers will become ineffective. Jake smiled. Then we'll just have to change our frequency too. Lisa, can you modify our jammers to follow their adaptations? Lisa Park's fingers flew over her control panel. Already on it, Captain. I'm programming our jammers to automatically adjust their frequency whenever the swarm tries to change channels. It's like playing tag, but with quantum physics. The next few hours became a bizarre game of technological cat and mouse. The Void. Swarm would attempt to establish communication on a new frequency, only to have the human jammers immediately shift to match it. Each adaptation by the swarm was countered within minutes by modifications to the human equipment. "They're learning," Amy observed, "but we're learning faster." Commander Veltar watched the ongoing battle with growing amazement. "Captain Morrison, what you're doing seems impossible. How are you adapting your technology so quickly?" Jake leaned back in his captain's chair with a satisfied expression. "Commander, when you've spent your whole career fixing things that break down unexpectedly, you get pretty good at improvising solutions on the fly. We're not smarter than the swarm. We're just more flexible." As the last of the coordinated swarm units fell into chaos, Jake realized they had accomplished something unprecedented. They hadn't just defeated the Void Swarm, they had completely neutralized it using nothing more than creative problem-solving and basic human engineering principles. The galaxy would never look at warfare the same way again. News of the human victory spread across the galaxy faster than light itself. Within days of the Void Swarm's defeat, Captain Jake Morrison found his communication systems flooded with messages from civilizations he had never heard of. Each one carried the same desperate tone that had characterized the Zephyrian distress call. Admiral Steve Collins, commander of the human Deep Space Fleet, stood in the communications center of the flagship Earth's Pride and watched the incoming requests scroll across multiple screens. The variety of crises was staggering, but what surprised him most was how similar they all seemed once you looked past the technical jargon. "Sir," Communication Officer Betty Williams said, looking up from her station with bewilderment, "we're receiving 17 separate requests for assistance with something called the Metal Plague from the Aquatic Federation. They say it's been consuming their underwater cities for 3 years. Steve nodded and moved to the next station, where technician Gary Foster was analyzing a message from the crystalline hegemony. "What about this energy parasite situation, Gary?" Gary shook his head in amazement. "According to their data, Admiral, these energy parasites have been draining power from their entire civilization for over a decade. They've tried every advanced energy weapon they have, but nothing works." Dr. Helen Brooks, the fleet's chief xenobiologist, looked up from her analysis of the various alien crises with excitement in her eyes. "Admiral, I think I see a pattern here. Every one of these impossible problems has the same basic structure. As the Void Swarm, they're all systems that have become too specialized to handle simple disruption." Steve studied the reports flowing in from across the galaxy. The metal plague that terrorized the Aquatic Federation was described as an unstoppable, corrosive agent that dissolved any material it touched. The energy parasites plaguing the crystalline hegemony were supposedly immune to all known forms of electromagnetic manipulation. Each crisis had been declared unsolvable by the galaxy's greatest experts. "Helen, what do you think?" Steve asked, his chief scientist. "Are these really as impossible as they claim?" Dr. Brooks smiled and pulled up a comparative analysis on her screen. "Admiral, remember when we thought rust was impossible to stop? Or when computer viruses seemed like unstoppable plagues? Every problem looks impossible until someone figures out the simple solution that everyone else missed." Engineer Lisa Park, who had been temporarily assigned to Admiral Collins' flagship after her success with the Void Swarm, studied the technical specifications of the metal plague. "Admiral, this is fascinating. According to the Aquatic Federation's data, this plague dissolves any material by breaking molecular bonds. But look at this. It only works in aquatic environments. So it needs water to function?" Steve asked. "Exactly," Lisa confirmed. "It's like a really aggressive form of rust. On Earth, we've been dealing with corrosion for thousands of years. We know how to stop it, prevent it, and even reverse it in many cases." Dr. Brooks pulled up another analysis. The energy parasites are even simpler. They're described as entities that drain electrical power from any source they encounter. But, according to the crystalline hegemony's own data, they can only absorb energy that's actively flowing through a circuit. So if you cut the power, Steve began. They starve, Helen finished. It's basic electrical safety. We learned this principle when we first started using electricity on Earth. The pattern became clear as the human team analyzed more alien crises. Each impossible problem was actually a variation of challenges that humans had faced and solved during their technological development. The galaxy's advanced civilizations had become so focused on sophisticated solutions that they had forgotten the simple principles underlying their problems. Captain Morrison's voice crackled over the communication system from his position near Zephyr Prime. "Admiral Collins, are you seeing all these requests for help?" "We're drowning in them, Jake," Steve replied. "Every civilization in the galaxy seems to have an unsolvable crisis that they want us to fix." "What's your assessment?" Jake asked. Steve looked around at his team of human engineers and scientists who were busy analyzing alien problems with the same practical approach they had used for centuries. "Honestly, Jake, I think we're about to become the galaxy's repair service." Dr. Brooks laughed. "Admiral, I've been thinking about this. What if the reason these advanced civilizations can't solve their problems is because they've forgotten how to think simply? They've been using advanced technology for so long that they can't see basic solutions anymore." The first test of this theory came when Admiral Collins decided to respond to the Aquatic Federation's plea for help with the metal plague. He dispatched a small human fleet led by Captain Susan Wright, along with a team of engineers who specialized in corrosion prevention. Captain Wright's report came back within a week, and it was exactly what the human team had expected. The metal plague was indeed a form of aggressive corrosion that thrived in the high mineral content of the Federation's ocean cities. The solution was embarrassingly simple: controlled application of corrosion inhibitors and the installation of sacrificial anodes to redirect the corrosive process. "Admiral," Captain Wright reported via subspace communication, "we stopped the metal plague using techniques that human shipbuilders have been using for over 200 years. The Aquatic Federation is calling it a miracle, but we just gave their cities the same treatment we give to underwater structures on Earth." The success with the metal plague opened floodgates across the galaxy. More civilizations began requesting human assistance, and each problem proved to have surprisingly simple solutions once approached with basic engineering principles. Engineer Paul Davis led a team to help the crystalline hegemony with their energy parasite problem. His solution was so simple it seemed almost insulting. Install circuit breakers and power switches that could isolate infected systems. The energy parasites, deprived of flowing electricity, simply went dormant. "The parasites are still there," Paul reported to Admiral Collins, "but they can't cause any damage without active power flowing through the systems. It's like unplugging a device to reset it. Basic electrical troubleshooting." Dr. Helen Brooks found herself in constant demand, as alien civilizations sought her expertise in solving biological and ecological crises. Her approach was always the same: treat each problem like a puzzle with a simple solution, rather than a disaster requiring advanced technology. "Every problem has a simple solution once you stop assuming it's complicated," she told a gathering of Galactic Council scientists who had come to study human problem-solving techniques. "The key is to look at what the problem actually is, not what everyone says it should be." The human reputation for practical problem-solving grew with each successful intervention. Advanced civilizations that had struggled with crises for decades found their problems resolved in days or weeks by human teams using basic engineering principles and common-sense approaches. Admiral Collins established the Human Assistance Corps, a volunteer organization dedicated to helping alien civilizations solve their seemingly impossible problems. The Corps' motto, painted on every ship, read, "No problem too big, no solution too simple." The irony wasn't lost on anyone in the human fleet. They had become the galaxy's go-to problem solvers, not because they had superior technology or ancient wisdom, but because they approached each challenge with fresh eyes and practical thinking. "Admiral," Communication Officer Betty Williams said one day as she processed another batch of requests for assistance. "Do you think the other civilizations will ever learn to solve these problems themselves?" Steve Collins looked out at the stars and considered the question. "Maybe, Betty. But right now, it seems like the galaxy needs someone to remind them that the best solutions are often the simplest ones." As more human teams spread across the galaxy, solving crises that had baffled advanced civilizations for generations, it became clear that humanity had found its place in the galactic community, not as conquerors or traders, but as the species that could see simple solutions to complex problems. 6 months after the first human intervention at Zephyr Prime, the galaxy had changed in ways that no one could have predicted. The Galactic Council chambers, once dominated by ancient species debating theoretical solutions to impossible problems, now regularly hosted human advisors who arrived with toolboxes and practical suggestions. Ambassador Linda Carter sat in the observer section of the Grand Assembly, watching as council members from a dozen different species argued about resource allocation for the Rimward colonies crisis. The colonies had been losing atmosphere for 3 years, and despite countless high-level meetings and advanced atmospheric processors, the problem continued to worsen. "Honorable delegates," the council speaker announced, "we will now hear from the human representative." Linda stood and walked to the central platform, carrying nothing more than a simple data pad and a confident smile. The massive chamber fell silent as hundreds of alien dignitaries focused their attention on the representative of the galaxy's youngest spacefaring civilization. "Thank you, Council Speaker," Linda began, her voice carrying clearly through the chamber's advanced acoustics. "I've reviewed the technical reports on the Rimward colonies situation, and I think we're overthinking this problem." A ripple of what might have been amusement passed through the assembled delegates. The idea that a crisis which had stumped the galaxy's greatest minds for 3 years could be solved by not overthinking seemed absurd. "The colonies are losing atmosphere through microfractures in their dome seals," Linda continued, displaying simple diagrams on the chamber's main screen. "Your atmospheric processors are working perfectly, but they can't keep up with the leak rate. Instead of building bigger processors, why don't we just fix the leaks?" Elder Krinthak of the Ancient Ones, whose species had mastered atmospheric technology before humans discovered fire, leaned forward in his hover chair. "Human Ambassador, these microfractures exist at the molecular level. They cannot be detected by conventional means, much less repaired." Linda nodded respectfully. "You're absolutely right, Elder. They can't be detected by conventional means. But on Earth, we've been dealing with similar problems in underwater habitats for decades. We use a technique called pressure differential detection. Basically, we pressurize sections of the dome and see where the pressure drops." She activated another display showing simple pressure testing equipment. "Once we find the leaks, we repair them using polymer sealants that cure under pressure. It's not elegant, but it works." The silence in the chamber was deafening. Elder Krinthak stared at the display for a long moment before speaking. "Ambassador Carter, are you suggesting that a problem which has challenged our greatest atmospheric engineers could be solved with plumbing techniques?" "Essentially, yes," Linda replied with a straight face. "Sometimes the best solutions are the ones you learned in trade school." 3 weeks later, human engineering teams had stopped the atmospheric leaks in all 17 Rimward colonies using exactly the techniques Linda had described. The cost was less than 1% of what the Galactic Council had budgeted for advanced atmospheric processors. Captain Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of Terra's Hope and reviewed the latest mission reports flooding in from human assistance teams scattered across the galaxy. Each successful intervention had led to requests for help with related problems, creating a cascade of practical problem-solving that was reshaping galactic civilization. "Captain," Communication Officer Nancy Hughes said from her station, "We're receiving a priority message from Dr. Brooks's team in the Spiral Arms sector. She says they've solved the quantum storm crisis. Jake raised an eyebrow. The quantum storms had been terrorizing shipping lanes for over 50 years, making entire sectors of space too dangerous to traverse. Multiple civilizations had lost fleets, trying to predict or deflect the chaotic energy phenomena. How did she manage that? Jake asked. Nancy smiled as she read the report. She says quantum storms are basically just cosmic weather patterns. Instead of trying to stop them or predict exactly where they'll hit, her team set up early warning beacons that give ships enough time to get out of the way. Like tornado sirens, Jake mused. That's exactly what she called them, sir. Nancy confirmed. The pattern was the same everywhere human teams worked. Problems that had been treated as mysterious, unsolvable crises turned out to have straightforward solutions once someone approached them with practical thinking instead of theoretical complexity. Dr. Helen Brooks herself had become something of a legend throughout the galaxy. Her simple approach to seemingly impossible problems had earned her invitations to lecture at the most prestigious scientific institutions in known space. Her most famous quote, "Every problem has a simple solution once you stop assuming it's complicated," had been translated into over 300 languages. Admiral Steve Collins received regular reports from the Human Assistance Corps teams, and each one reinforced his growing understanding of humanity's unique role in galactic civilization. While other species had spent millennia perfecting advanced technologies, humans had focused on solving practical problems with whatever tools they had available. "Admiral," his aide, Lieutenant Mark Turner, said as he delivered the daily briefing, "We've received formal thanks from 47 different civilizations this week alone. The crystalline hegemony wants to establish a permanent human advisory position in their government." Steve looked up from his reports with amusement. "Let me guess, they want us to help them solve more impossible problems?" "Actually, sir, they want to learn how to think like humans do," Mark replied. "Several other civilizations have made similar requests. They want to understand how we approach problem solving." The request led to the establishment of the Human Problem Solving Institute, based on a neutral space station in the Galactic core. Scientists and engineers from across the galaxy came to study human approaches to technical challenges, learning principles that had been forgotten or never discovered by their own civilizations. Engineer Lisa Park found herself teaching courses on basic troubleshooting principles to beings whose species had mastered faster than light travel before Earth's sun had formed. The irony was not lost on her as she explained concepts like turning it off and on again and checking the simple things first to civilizations that could manipulate matter at the quantum level. "The key," Lisa told her latest class of alien engineers, "is to always start with the assumption that the solution is simpler than the problem appears. Most of the time, complex problems are just simple problems that have been misunderstood." A student from the Machine Collective, whose species existed as pure information, raised a metallic appendage. "But what if the problem genuinely requires advanced technology to solve?" Lisa smiled. "Then you use advanced technology to implement a simple solution. Complexity should be in your tools, not in your thinking." Captain Morrison watched the transformation of galactic civilization with wonder and pride. Humanity had found its place among the stars not as conquerors or merchants, but as the species that could see past complexity to find practical solutions. The galaxy's ancient civilizations, with their vast knowledge and sophisticated technologies, had come to depend on the fresh perspective that humans brought to every challenge. The final testament to humanity's impact came during the Galactic Council's annual assembly, when Elder Krinthak of the Ancient Ones stood to address the gathered delegates. "For 10,000 years, our species has sought to solve the great challenges of existence through the accumulation of knowledge and the development of ever more sophisticated technologies," the elder said, his ancient voice carrying the weight of millennia. "The humans have reminded us of a truth we had forgotten, that wisdom lies not in making things more complex, but in making them more simple. He paused and gestured toward the human delegation. We have much to learn from these young beings who see clearly what our ancient eyes have overlooked. Perhaps it is time for the galaxy to think like humans do. Ambassador Linda Carter stood and bowed respectfully to the elder. With respect, Elder Krinthak, we don't think you need to think like humans. You just need to remember that the best solution to any problem is usually the one that actually works. As the assembly session ended and delegates began filing out of the chamber, Captain Morrison reflected on how much had changed since that first desperate call from Zephyr Prime. The galaxy had not just gained a new problem-solving resource, it had rediscovered the value of practical thinking and simple solutions. The humans continued their work throughout the galaxy, one solved problem at a time, proving that sometimes the most advanced approach is simply the most practical one. Their ships carried the motto that had become famous across known space: no problem too big, no solution too simple. In the end, the galaxy had learned that progress didn't always require moving forward. Sometimes it required remembering the basics that had been left behind.